The forbidden scan, the cargo vessel Meridian drifted through the neutral zone between the Zarathi Empire and the Human Colonial Federation. Captain James Reeves stood at the helm, his weathered hands gripping the command console as he watched the stars drift by through the viewport. 20 years of running cargo through these routes had taught him that the quiet moments never lasted long in disputed space. His first officer, Maria Gonzalez, approached with a datapad in hand. The manifest showed their cargo as agricultural equipment bound for the colony on Kepler 442b, but both of them knew that certain containers in the lower holds carried special designation codes. These were the containers that no one talked about, the ones that required captain-level authorization to even acknowledge their existence. The proximity alarm shattered the bridge's peaceful atmosphere. 3 ships materialized from hyperspace, their crystalline hulls reflecting the light of nearby stars in prismatic patterns that identified them immediately as Zarathi patrol vessels. The Zarathi were silicon-based lifeforms who viewed the universe through the lens of absolute logic and mathematical precision. They had no concept of intuition or gut feelings, which made them both predictable and dangerous in equal measure. A communication channel opened without request, and the angular face of a Zarathi commander appeared on the main screen. Its features were sharp and geometric, like a statue carved from living crystal. When it spoke, the universal translator converted its harmonic resonances into flat, emotionless words. Human vessel Meridian, you will submit to standard cargo inspection as outlined in Treaty Section 7, subsection 12. Compliance is mandatory. Resistance will be interpreted as an act of aggression. Reeves exchanged a glance with Gonzalez. They both knew the Zarathi had every legal right to scan their ship in neutral space. The treaties that kept the peace between dozens of species required transparency in shipping lanes. But those same treaties had been written before humanity had learned certain truths about survival in a galaxy where they were neither the strongest nor the most advanced species. The captain activated his response channel. Zarathi Patrol, this is Captain Reeves of the Meridian. We acknowledge your request and will comply with standard scanning procedures. Please note that we are carrying sensitive agricultural samples that may react to certain scanning frequencies. We request you limit your scans to standard electromagnetic spectrums only. The Zarathi commander's crystalline features shifted in what might have been confusion or dismissal. Negative, Captain Reeves. We will conduct a full spectrum analysis, including quantum resonance scanning. Your agricultural samples are not our concern. Begin deceleration immediately. Reeves felt his stomach tighten. Quantum resonance scanning would penetrate every inch of his ship, reading not just the contents but the molecular structure of everything aboard. It would definitely trigger the automated systems in the special containers. He turned to his communications officer, Lieutenant Park, and made a subtle hand gesture that meant one thing: prepare emergency protocols. The Meridian dropped out of its acceleration curve, coming to rest relative to the Zarathi vessels. The 3 patrol ships took positions around the human vessel, forming a perfect triangular formation. From each ship, a beam of silvery light emerged, converging on the Meridian's hull. The scanning had begun. On the bridge, Reeves watched his displays carefully. The scan penetrated through the outer hull, through the crew quarters, through the legitimate cargo bays filled with farming equipment and seed stocks. Everything appeared normal on the Zarathi's readings, just another human cargo vessel carrying supplies to distant colonies. Then the beams reached the lower holds, the ones with the special designation codes. The change was instantaneous. Every alarm on the Zarathi vessels began screaming at once. On the main communications screen, the commander's crystalline form actually cracked, thin lines spreading across its surface in a display of shock that Reeves had never seen from a Zarathi before. The scanning beams intensified, turning from silver to deep purple as the aliens tried to understand what they were detecting. What the Zarathi found defied their understanding of biology and physics. The special containers didn't hold cargo in any traditional sense. Instead, they held something that shouldn't have been possible: dormant ecosystems compressed into spaces no larger than a standard shipping container. But these weren't just any ecosystems. They were complete biospheres, each one containing millions of DNA samples, bacterial cultures, and something else. Something that made the Zarathi's quantum scanners scream in confusion. The containers held temporal stasis fields, each one preserving a different moment in Earth's history. One container held a perfect snapshot of Earth's biodiversity from the year 2050, before first contact. Another held samples from 2150, after humanity had learned to manipulate genetics. But the third container, the one that made the Zarathi commander's form crack with shock, held something from 2250, from after humanity had discovered the ruins on Mars and learned the truth about extinction events in the galaxy. Inside that container was humanity's answer to the greatest threat any species faced among the stars: complete annihilation. It was called the Genesis Protocol, and it was the reason humanity had survived when 12 other species had been wiped from existence in the last century alone. The protocol was simple in concept but impossible in execution for any species that hadn't faced extinction and survived. It was the ability to restart not just human life, but entire human worlds complete with ecosystems, cultures, and technologies from a single container. The Zarathi commander's voice, when it finally came through the communications channel, had lost its flat certainty. Captain Reeves explained immediately. Our scanners detect impossible readings. Each container holds more biomass than your entire ship could contain. Temporal distortions indicate multiple timeline preservation. This violates known physics. Reeves stood slowly from his captain's chair. He had hoped this day would never come. But every human captain knew it was inevitable. The galaxy would eventually discover humanity's greatest secret, the thing that made them different from every other species that had achieved faster-than-light travel. Humans didn't just prepare for disaster. They prepared to survive their own extinction. Commander, Reeves said calmly, you've activated our Genesis protocol. I recommend you cease scanning immediately. The stasis fields are beginning to destabilize from your quantum interference. If they collapse, this entire sector will be flooded with competing biological matrices trying to establish themselves. We're talking about 3 different versions of Earth's biosphere attempting to exist in the same space simultaneously. The Zarathi ships immediately ceased their scanning, but it was too late. The damage had been done. Inside the special containers, automated systems that had been dormant for years suddenly came online. These weren't just preservation systems. They were something far more sophisticated, something humanity had developed after studying the ruins of dead civilizations across the galaxy. They were survival systems that could adapt, learn, and evolve in response to threats. The first sign of activation was subtle. The Meridian's power system suddenly showed a massive drain, as if something was pulling energy directly from the reactor core. Then the ship's computer systems began receiving data streams from the containers, millions of terabytes of information flooding through circuits that shouldn't have been able to handle such volume. The Genesis protocol wasn't just preserving life. It was preparing to deploy it. On the Zarathi vessels, sensors detected something impossible. The human ship was somehow growing, not physically expanding but increasing in mass and complexity at the quantum level. Space itself seemed to bend around the vessel as pocket dimensions began forming in the cargo holds, each one a potential seedbed for an entire world's worth of life. The containers weren't just storage devices. They were compressed realities waiting for the right trigger to unfold. Gonzalez looked at her captain with eyes that held both fear and pride. The protocol was humanity's ultimate insurance policy, developed after they had discovered the ruins of the architects on Mars. The architects had been a species that had achieved near godlike technology before something had wiped them out. But they had left behind a message, a warning written into the quantum structure of their ruins. In this galaxy, extinction is not a possibility but a certainty. The only question is whether you're prepared to return from it. Humanity had taken that warning to heart. Every colony ship, every cargo vessel, every military craft that ventured into deep space carried at least one Genesis container. They were humanity's promise to itself that no matter what happened, no matter what force tried to eliminate them from existence, humans would return. They would return changed, perhaps evolved certainly, but they would return. The Zarathi commander's image flickered on the screen as its ship's systems struggled to process what they were witnessing. The perfectly logical, mathematically precise alien mind was confronting something that defied its understanding of reality. Humans hadn't just prepared for their own extinction. They had weaponized resurrection itself. Captain Reeves, the commander said, its harmonic voice actually showing what might have been fear. What have your species done? This technology, it should not exist. The energy requirements alone would require the output of a star. The computational complexity would overwhelm any known processing system. How is this possible? Reeves smiled grimly. Every human child learned the answer to that question in their history classes. It was the first lesson of survival in a hostile galaxy, carved into the monument on Mars where humanity had discovered the architect ruins. The captain spoke the words that every human knew by heart, the words that had driven their species to develop the Genesis Protocol. We die, but we die prepared. We fall, but we fall with seeds. We end, but every ending is a new beginning. That's what makes us human, Commander. We don't just accept extinction. We plan for what comes after. Humanity's hidden truth, the Galactic Council chamber had never seen such chaos. Representatives from 47 different species filled the massive amphitheater, their voices creating a cacophony of sounds that the universal translators struggled to process. At the center of the commotion stood Ambassador Lisa Chen, humanity's representative to the Council, her face calm despite the storm of accusations being hurled at her species. The Zerathi delegation had called an emergency session after their encounter with the Meridian. The recording of the scanning incident had been broadcast to every member species, showing the impossible readings and the activation of what humans called the Genesis Protocol. Some species were terrified, others intrigued, and a few were openly hostile at the revelation that humanity possessed such technology. The Council's speaker, an ancient Vorthon whose species had been traveling the stars for 3 millennia, raised its ceremonial staff for silence. The chamber gradually quieted, thousands of eyes, optical organs, and sensory apparatus turning toward the central platform where Ambassador Chen stood beside a holographic projection of the Genesis container. The Vorthon's voice resonated through the chamber like the deep notes of a pipe organ. Ambassador Chen of Earth, the human species stands accused of violating the Technology Limitation Treaty, specifically the provisions against extinction-level devices and temporal manipulation. How do you respond to these charges? Chen stepped forward, her diplomatic training keeping her voice steady and clear. Honored Speaker, distinguished representatives, humanity pleads not guilty to these charges. The Genesis Protocol is not a weapon. It is not designed to cause extinction, but to prevent it. We developed this technology not as an act of aggression, but as an act of desperate survival. The Zerathi commander who had encountered the Meridian rose from its crystalline seat. Its form had been repaired since the incident, but hairline cracks still showed where its structure had fractured from shock. Ambassador Chen, your Genesis Protocol contains compressed biospheres capable of terraforming entire worlds in days rather than centuries. It holds temporal snapshots that could rewrite the biological history of planets. How is this not a weapon of mass destruction? Chen touched a control on her podium, and the holographic projection changed. It showed Earth beautiful and blue floating in space. Then the image shifted, showing the same world burned and lifeless, its atmosphere stripped away, its oceans boiled into nothing. The assembled representatives fell silent at the sight. This was Earth in the year 2087, during what we call the first extinction. A gamma ray burst from a distant supernova struck our world without warning. In 6 hours, 90% of all life on our planet was dead. Our ozone layer was gone, our atmosphere was ionizing, and radiation levels made the surface uninhabitable. By every measure known to galactic science, humanity should have ended that day. The image shifted again, showing massive underground bunkers, orbital stations, and ships fleeing into deep space. Chen continued, her voice carrying the weight of human history. We survived through preparation, through redundancy, through sheer stubborn refusal to accept extinction. But we lost so much. Entire ecosystems gone forever. Species that had existed for millions of years wiped out in hours. Cultures, languages, and irreplaceable genetic diversity all lost. A representative from the Zelathi collective, a hive mind species that valued preservation above all else, chittered for attention. But you recovered. Earth lives again. Your species thrived and expanded to the stars. Chen nodded. We recovered, yes, but it took 300 years and technology we barely understood, salvaged from ruins we found on Mars. The architects, whoever they were, had faced the same crisis. They had failed to survive it, but they left behind fragments of their knowledge. We studied those fragments and asked ourselves a question that changed our species forever. What if extinction wasn't a one-time event, but a recurring pattern in the galaxy? She changed the display again, showing a map of the Milky Way marked with thousands of red dots. Each dot represents a dead civilization we've discovered in our exploration. The architects on Mars, the singers of Proxima, the gardeners of the Kepler systems, all of them reached the stars. All of them achieved great things. All of them are gone with only ruins to mark their passing. We found the pattern, distinguished representatives. On average, every spacefaring civilization faces an extinction event every 1,200 years. Sometimes it's war, sometimes it's disease, sometimes it's cosmic disasters like gamma-ray bursts or rogue black holes, but it always comes. The chamber erupted in discussion as species compared their own historical records. Many had found similar ruins, similar patterns, but none had drawn the same conclusion humanity had. The Vorthan speaker called for order again. "What does this have to do with your Genesis protocol, Ambassador?" Chen straightened her shoulders. "When we realized that extinction was cyclical, that it would come for us again and again no matter how advanced we became, we made a decision. We wouldn't just try to survive the next extinction. We would prepare to return from it, stronger and more adapted than before. The Genesis protocol is our answer to the galaxy's greatest threat. Not war, not disease, but the certainty of extinction itself." The hologram shifted to show the interior of a Genesis container. The complexity was staggering. Layers upon layers of compressed reality, each one holding not just biological samples but entire ecosystems in quantum suspension. More than that, each container held the complete cultural and technological heritage of humanity at different points in their development. Each Genesis container is a seed, Chen explained. If humanity is wiped out tomorrow, these seeds will activate. They'll find suitable worlds and begin the process of resurrection, not just human life but entire biospheres. The bacteria that process our waste, the plants that produce our oxygen, the animals that share our worlds, even the microbiomes that live in our bodies. Everything needed to restart not just human life but human civilization. The Thraxian delegate, whose species reproduced through sporing and understood the concept of seeds better than most, leaned forward with interest. But the temporal aspects? Why preserve multiple timelines? Chen smiled sadly. Because we don't know which version of humanity will be needed to survive the next extinction. The humans of 2050 were hardy and adaptable, but technologically limited. The humans of 2150 had mastered genetics but were perhaps too dependent on technology. The humans of 2250 had learned from the architects, but might have lost some essential quality that earlier humans possessed. By preserving all of them, we ensure that whatever challenge causes our extinction, some version of humanity will be suited to overcome it. The Zarathi commander rose again, its crystalline form catching the light. "You speak of this as survival, but what you've created is immortality for your species. You could die 1,000 times and return 1,001. This gives you an advantage no other species possesses." Chen's expression hardened. "Commander, with respect, we didn't create this technology to gain advantage over other species. We created it because we found the graves of 12 billion architects on Mars. All of them dead from an extinction event they saw coming, but couldn't prevent. We created it because we discovered the singers had composed a death song for their entire species, knowing they would be gone before anyone heard it. We created it because the alternative was to accept that one day, humanity would be nothing but ruins for some other species to find and wonder about." She paused, looking around the chamber at the assembled representatives. "Every species here has found the ruins. You've all seen the pattern, even if you haven't acknowledged it. The galaxy is a graveyard of civilizations that thought they were permanent. We refuse to be another tombstone. If that makes us criminals in your eyes, then we accept your judgment. But we will not apologize for refusing to go quietly into extinction." The chamber fell silent. The weight of Chen's words, the implications of humanity's discovery, settled over the assembly like a shroud. Every species present had to confront the same terrible truth. They were all living on borrowed time, waiting for their own extinction event to arrive. The Vorthan speaker stood slowly, its ancient form creaking with the movement. "The council will recess for deliberation. Ambassador Chen, one final question. If your Genesis protocol activates, if humanity returns from extinction, will you be the same species you are now?" Chen considered the question carefully. "No, honored speaker. Each resurrection would be an evolution, an adaptation to whatever caused our extinction. We might return stronger, smarter, more resistant to radiation or disease or whatever killed us. But the core of what makes us human, our creativity, our stubbornness, our refusal to accept defeat, that would remain. We would still be human, Just human version 2.0 or 3.0 or whatever iteration was needed to survive. As the council filed out for deliberation, the Zalathi representative approached Chen privately. Its compound eyes studied her with an intensity that would have been unnerving if Chen hadn't spent years in diplomatic service. "Your species has found the answer to the Great Filter," it said through its translator. "The thing that stops most civilizations from truly expanding across the galaxy. It's not technology or resources or even war. It's the certainty of extinction." Chen nodded. "And our answer is simple. We make extinction irrelevant. We die, we return, we adapt, we continue. It's not immortality, it's evolution on a species-wide scale. And honestly, we're terrified of it. Each time we would return, we would be less like the humans who originally left Earth and more like something new. But the alternative is to simply cease to exist, and that's the one thing humanity refuses to do." The council reconvened 3 hours later. The verdict was not what anyone expected. The Vorthon speaker addressed the chamber with words that would change galactic history. "After extensive deliberation, this council finds humanity not guilty of violating the Technology Limitation Treaty. Furthermore, we propose a new resolution. The Genesis Protocol technology will be shared with all member species, with humanity serving as advisors for its implementation. If extinction is indeed cyclical and inevitable, then we must all prepare to return from it. The age of permanent death for spacefaring civilizations ends today." The chamber erupted in chaos again, but this time it wasn't anger or fear. It was hope. For the first time in galactic history, extinction might not mean the end. It might just mean a new beginning. And at the center of it all, Ambassador Chen stood quietly, knowing that humanity had just changed the galaxy forever. They had given every species the one thing they thought impossible: a second chance at existence. As the representatives began discussing implementation and sharing protocols, Chen received a message on her private communicator. It was from Captain Reeves of the Meridian. The message was simple: "The seeds are planted. Let them grow." She smiled. Humanity had always been good at planting seeds. Now they had taught the entire galaxy to do the same. Whatever extinction events came next, whatever cosmic disasters or wars or plagues swept through the galaxy, life would continue. Different perhaps, evolved certainly, but continuous. The cycle of extinction was broken, replaced by a cycle of renewal. And in the deep vaults of Earth, Mars, and every human colony, the Genesis containers waited patiently. They were no longer humanity's secret shame or last desperate hope. They were now the galaxy's promise to itself that no matter what came, life would find a way to return. The greatest gift humanity could give to the galaxy wasn't their technology or their resources. It was their stubborn, unshakable belief that extinction was just another problem to be solved. The council session ended with a phrase that would become the rallying cry for a new era of galactic civilization, spoken first by Ambassador Chen, but soon adopted by every species. "We die, but we die prepared. We fall, but we fall with seeds. We end, but every ending is a new beginning." In the vast darkness between stars, where ancient ruins drifted as monuments to dead civilizations, something had fundamentally changed. The galaxy was no longer a graveyard waiting for new casualties. It had become a garden where even death could not stop the flowering of life. And it had all started with one human cargo ship, one alien scan, and the revelation that humanity had learned the ultimate lesson of survival. Sometimes the best way to avoid extinction is to prepare for resurrection.